and we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, our project that we're going to start is a vintagey radio thing. And I guess there's a number of ways we could think about this. I would like to put in the inside of my radio a little Raspberry Pi, and then have a little song selection on it, maybe like Christmas songs or something like that as the season is coming. It's almost Halloween, so it's time to think about Christmas. Oh. So that's what I'm going to put in mind. However, you could put all sorts of, like, much less electronics intensive things inside of your little vintagey radio. So they make, well, here, tell you what, let me do this. So the project that we're kind of trying to get across is vintagey radio. And when I think of vintage radio, this is kind of the style that I think of here. It's like a curvy kind of thing, and it's got a speaker and a couple of knobs on the front, you know, like, man, I love that. That's so cool. A big dial is cool. You know, this is pretty neat. That's not as curvy. I guess I'm thinking more of a curvy design. But so you got to get the idea. It's a curvy thing, usually made of wood. Sometimes there are plastic ones. I'm less impressed by the plastic ones, honestly. I think these ones made of wood are super cool. And this is going to be the kind of style we're aiming for. As far as the internal components, like I said, I'm going to stick a Raspberry Pi in the inside of mine. But you can easily find Bluetooth. Wow. Bluetooth board. You can easily find these kind of things here. And these are, you know, they're dirt cheap. Let's find one with nice outputs. You know, like, so I actually have this one, I think. So it's a real basic little thing. It's just takes a Bluetooth signal, and it's got a speaker output on it, and you give it 12 volts and hook it up to your phone or whatever, and you can play music. It's like a Bluetooth speaker. So, you know, for $30 plus a little bit of labor and a couple of speakers, which you can probably find somewhere laying around at the makerspace, you can make yourself a little Bluetooth radio in a vintagey kind of style, and that's kind of what we're aiming for here. So, curvy Bluetooth kind of speaker. And with that in mind, let's jump into Fusion and go ahead and get started. The way that I'm going to approach this is from a sheet metal standpoint. So the idea here is we have a piece of wood that we kerf cut and bend into that outer curvy shape of a radio. And maybe this will make more sense once we actually get started. So I've got a new document open here. And I'm going to go ahead and, actually, before I don't save that, kind of this kind of thing here. I think the one I draw is going to be a little bit different than this, but this is kind of our general idea of a shape we're going to try to get done in class today. I'm going to go ahead and don't even save that, because I'm bold like that. Let's see, do I have somebody I got to admit here? All right, so... Ahaha, double duty. We're joining us double. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a brand new sketch. So I'll go here and I'll click on this create sketch icon here. I'm going to start my sketch on the front. So I'm going to use this front drawing plane here so I can click on the front in my navigation cube if I want to make sure I click on the right, the front drawing plane. And now on this drawing plane, this is going to define the shape of our radio. So let's kind of first think about a height and a width. So I'm going to grab my Create menu tool, the 2-point rectangle tool. And I'm just going to use this 2-point rectangle to define the outer edges of my radio. So I want my radio to be like 10 inches wide and let's say 7 inches tall. 10 by 6? 10 by 6. That seems pretty good. Looks like a nice ratio to me. I suppose we could use the golden ratio or something like that, and I'll probably draw a couple of these sketches just so we can get a feel for the different kind of shapes that we can do here. So I'm going to turn all of these lines into construction lines. The reason being is I'm just using this to kind of define the outer edges of my sketch. I'm not actually going to use these lines. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn these into construction lines here just by clicking on them and pushing the X key. You can also highlight them, and then in the sketch palette we have here, you can change the line type into a construction line there, and that'll change that to a dashed line. And now I'm going to start actually drawing my radio. So I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to draw a line out from the bottom center here. So right down here at the bottom, right at the midpoint, I have my little blue triangle that pops up telling me that I'm snapping to the midpoint of this construction line. And I'm going to draw my line over, let's say, 3 inches. That seems fine for now. Maybe 4. Let's go a little bit further. Now, you know, like you can move these measurements around if you want to place them in any particular way. I'm going to draw another line that goes up from here up to the top corner here. And then finally, a last line that will go over to the middle here. And now I'm going to draw one more line that just kind of divides it right in half. And that line too, I'm going to turn that into a construction line. So I've kind of got half of my frame drawn here. And I'm going to add in some curves now. So in the Modify menu, I'm going to come here and grab my Fillet option. So what this fillet option lets us do is choose 2 lines that are connected to each other, and then to specify a dimension here. So I'm going to go with 2 inches. 2-inch radius seems pretty good. And before I go ahead and click enter, I can add in additional lines to add fillets to. So I can add that same 2-inch fillet right down here at the bottom as well. And then if I hit the enter key, now it'll go ahead and place those fillets. And you can see I've got a radius dimension here that it gives me. And if at any point I want to change that, say I want to make that 3 inches, oh, it swore at me. Failed to resolve. Modify one or more of the following constraints. Those tangent constraints are... That's interesting. Well, 2 inches is what I wanted to be anyway. So now the only thing I have left to do to kind of complete the shape of my radio here is to mirror it over to the other side. So I'll grab my mirror tool here and I'll specify each of the lines. And, you know, it may be a little bit of a dance to pick the right line. So I don't want to pick the dashed line, I want to pick the solid line. So you can see the dashed line is not highlighted, but my solid line that I drew is there. And because those lines are right on top of each other, it may be a little dance. You may have to kind of zoom in to make sure you're able to highlight and click on the proper line there. And then as our mirror line, I'm going to choose this middle section right here. And then I'm going to say OK. So that's kind of the basic shape for this radio here. Let me go ahead and draw another one just to show you options here. I'm going to just draw it right next to it, because why not? So I'll grab my rectangle tool, I'll grab a 2-point rectangle, and I'm going to place it right in here. And I'll make this one the same size, 6 by 10 is what I made it. And again, I made these into construction lines. This is where, you know, like we're getting into that creative freedom that I used to point out to a lot in class. Because ideally, you guys are going to draw your radio. You guys aren't going to draw my radio. You want to make your own thing. So that's why we're makers here at the Makerspace, because we want to make the stuff that we want to make. All right, so let's see. Another shape that we could do is, what if it was just like kind of an oblique shape? That's kind of interesting. So if I grab my line tool and I start in the bottom corner and I kind of go over to the side at kind of an angle like this, and then I just connect those lines to our midpoint. Let's see, how could I specify? Maybe what I'll do is if I add a dimension, so what I want to do is draw this line over here, but I want it to be kind of symmetrical. I won't be able to use the mirror command like I did before. However, if I add a dimension here, if I go up and say sketch dimension, and I figure out what length that is, maybe I'll make it a nice round number like 2 inches. Now I can do the same thing over here. I could draw a line from the top corner somewhere down to the bottom here, and I'll purposefully make it in definitely the wrong spot. And now I can use that same dimension tool. So up here I gave this a dimension of 2 inches. Down here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and say create, and then sketch dimension, and I'm going to go ahead and give those 2 points a dimension, and I'll just give that 2 inches as well. And then I'll go ahead and say finish sketch. Oh, not finish sketch, because I need to connect the dots there. So I just need to connect the center over here like that, and the center over here like this. And now I can do just like I did before, because we're all about the curves here. Oop, and that was the wrong curve. So if you see, you know, one way to make sure you do this right. So I can, if I hit this dashed line and then hit the straight line, it may not give me the fillet that I'm looking for here. So another way to select your fillet is if you hover over the corner, that works here, then I can give that a fillet of 2 inches there, and I can do the same thing down here. There's my little 2-inch fillet. I suppose if it's 2 inches, it's not really little, I suppose, huh? And you know what? Maybe I'll leave it pointy up here in the corner. That's kind of an interesting shape. Maybe we'll roll with that. Alright. So, the last thing that we want to do to this sketch is to kind of put a split in it. Do you guys have a shape you're happy with, or should I give you some more time? A little bit more? I'm hearing a little bit more time. I'm hearing lots of mouse clicks here, so I'm hearing a little bit more time. Maybe I'll do one more. So I'll come up and make another rectangle. And again, I'm making mine 10 by 6. Something worth noting, like if I know I want to make construction lines, before I start making my rectangle, I can turn on hit this little line type construction button here. And now if I say rectangle and 2-point rectangle, you know, give it my 10 by 7 measurement, now it's going to make everything that I draw until I turn this button off. It's going to make those all construction lines. So I don't want to do that anymore. Let's see, how about another shape that we make is, you know what, instead of making this a construction line, I'm going to make my actual shape out of this rectangle here. Grab my fillet option here, and I can just start specifying corners. Maybe I'll just do the top. Leave the bottom a little angled piece there. You know, as far as bending goes, this actually makes it easier if we have 3 corners, because then we've got end pieces to bend our plywood around. This is actually the shape that I bent initially when I was getting ready for this class. I bent this shape right here. So you can see it's bent, curve cut plywood there, a little 1/2 inch. Alright, cool. So before we finish our sketches, we need to do one thing. So I'm going to go over and pick one of mine. Right now, as we drew our shapes are one continuous line, hopefully. So you have one line that goes all the way around and is like a continuous line. However, for this little trick that we're going to do, this sheet metal trick, we actually want to have this not be a continuous piece. So, because we need to unfold it, and in order to unfold it, it's got to have a break somewhere in it, and I'm going to choose to make my break right at the very bottom. So the place where the seam is going to be is right down here at the bottom. Now, if you've got a design where something like this is happening, where you got a corner, a good place to put your break would be right at this corner. So maybe I'll do this in a couple ways too. So on this first piece, if I zoom out and zoom way in down here to the bottom, I'm going to draw a line that goes straight up from the bottom, an unspecified dimension. Just needs to go straight up, and the key measurement that we want to add here is I want to add a dimension. So I'm going to click on Create and then Sketch Dimension here. And now if we specify that line and my midline there, and I'm just going to give this the most minuscule spacing of 0.01 inches, because I need to have like almost no space at all here. So the idea is we just need to break this line open. So I've got a 0.01 inch measurement now, and now I can come in and use a tool that we don't use a whole lot, or I don't use a whole lot. From the Modify menu, there is this Trim tool. So the Trim tool will let us specify a line to cut out, and it finds that cut point based on 2 other lines. So the 2 other lines that we have here is my little dashed line and this line that I just made. And now I can click on that line that I want to cut out there. I'm going to turn this little tiny line into a construction line. So now our line does not go all the way through. That's just our dash construction line that's following through there. I'll do this in one other of my drawings here. So over on the side, like this guy way over here, because I've got a 90-degree corner here, I'm going to choose to make my break over in that corner. So I'm going to draw a little line here of an unspecified height or dimension. I'll turn that into a construction line by hitting the little line type construction button in my sketch palette there, and that turns that into a construction line. And then I'll specify a dimension that this line is away from this line, because this little piece of the line down here is what we're going to cut away. So in order to do that, we click on Create, and then we come down to Sketch Dimension here. And now I'm going to dimension this line from that line. And now there's this little measurement I can place somewhere down here. And again, just like 0.01. Will that work? That'll probably work. And then I just need to trim away this little bit here, because right now this is a continuous shape, and we want to trim away this little bit of the line. And we'll do that by clicking on the Trim tool in our Modify menu. So we'll go ahead and click on Trim, and then I'm going to go ahead and specify that little piece of the line down there. So now it's broken away, and we've got one line that comes all the way. It's got a start and an end, as opposed to like a continuous circle. Alright, so now, and you'll also notice that, so this middle one that I did not do that cutaway on, this is an enclosed shape, so I could extrude this. These shapes on the side, because I made that cut, this is no longer an enclosed shape, so it's not a thing that I can extrude anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah? Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Sketch. I'm going to go ahead and name my sketch. I've got this sketch 1, and I'm going to call this Radio Shape. Alright, cool. So now, I'm going to go ahead and leave the comfort. We want to make this form here that we're making here. So I'm going to leave the comfort of my solid workspace here. So we've got these workspaces up at the top. We've got solid, we've got surface, we've got this mesh workspace, and I'm going to enter the sheet metal workspace. Sheet metal, ooh, it's like witchcraft over here. Alright, and when I say witchcraft, I mean it's a lot of flanges. There's a lot of flanges when you have the sheet metal, when you're in the sheet metal workspace. In fact, almost everything that you do will be a flange, or some way, shape, or form, the flange command. So from the Create menu, if you scroll down to flange, this is a useful command. We're gonna get to know this well. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this flange command, and I'm gonna specify as my flange that continuous line, or that non-uncontinuous line. I think I actually have to pick on both of these. So I clicked on, for me I had to click on 2. It's only showing 1. It's only showing 1 profile. But I had to click twice, so I had to click on each side of that line. And I can scroll down and see that indeed there is no selected line in between where I have my little break there. And that's important. Now we have to tell it what set of rules that we're going to use. So the sheet metal rules, there are some built-in rules here that we see over on the side. So there's various kinds of steel, stainless steel, or regular steel, or aluminum. There are inch and millimeter measurements for steel, because when you order various gauges of steel, you'll probably order them by gauge, or you can order them by millimeters. So if I choose this steel inches option here as the rule that I'm gonna go by for now, and now I specify a distance, and I'm gonna make this like 3 inches. So when I typed in a distance, now you can see we've got some thickness going on our piece. And something that I'm noticing is I actually wanted this line to be an outside diameter of my piece. And right now my sheet metal goes outside of that line. So all I have to do in order to change that is to change from side 1 to side 2. And then I'm going to say OK. Now, let me cover something just in case one of you guys had this problem. If, for example, like this line, this over here, if I do that same operation, if I choose my flange command, and I pick this line right here, and let's make it 3 inches, and I'll change my sheet metal rule. Actually, you can only have 1 sheet metal rule per document, so I'm already using my inch steel rule here. Now you'll see here in this case too, it's on the outside of my line. So I go, oh, well, I'm just going to change that from side 1 to side 2. And it gives me an error. And the reason it's giving me an error is because down here where we specified that this was going to be, I'm going to change this back to side 1, where we specified this little distance here to be 0.01 inches. If I'm making my sheet metal on the inside of this line, you could see how those pieces of sheet metal would collide with each other and overlap, and it's kind of disallowing that from happening. So in order to fix that, in this kind of case here, I have to go back to my radio shape sketch here and edit it, and then I have to change this to be a little bit bigger than the thickness of my sheet metal. So my sheet metal is 0.1 inch. If I make it 0.12 and say finish sketch, and now I grab my flange tool here, say I want to make a 3-inch flange and I want to make it on side 2, now it'll let me do that. Alright, so are you with me so far? Yeah? No? We'll take it. You're catching on the, alright, right on. Alright, so I kind of mentioned at the beginning of class, but I really want to make this out of wood. And right now, we're making this out of sheet metal. And I suppose you could roll with it and say, hey, I really like to make my radio out of sheet metal. I think that'd be cool. And I say power to you. It's your project. You can do whatever you want. If you want to make a cool bent sheet metal radio, bending it is on you. Talk to Nick. I bet you Nick's bent his fair share of sheet metal before. You do body work?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So call Nick. He'll have 0 fun, and he'll help you bend your sheet metal. But if you're like me, and you want to come in here to the makerspace and not bother Nick, I'm going to make this out of wood. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to make our own sheet metal rule. So over here in the browser, we have this new option that's popped up. Once we made our sheet metal and made this a physical thing, we have a sheet metal rule that's popped up here. And if we want to, we can change those rules. So I'm going to, click on the Modify menu, and I'm going to choose Sheet Metal Rules here, right from the second from the top. And now I've got this steel inches measurement that is specified as being in this design. So in this design it says steel inches, and I can edit this specific rule by clicking on the little pencil icon, or I can do what I want to do here is I can make a brand new sheet metal rule so I don't mess up my old rules, my existing rules. I can make a brand new sheet metal rule if I click on this second icon, and if I just stop moving my mouse, it'll give me that new rule tooltip there. So I indeed do want to make a brand new rule, and I'm going to go ahead and name it. So instead of steel inches 1, this is going to be 1/2 inch plywood. Now I will say that there's a whole crap load of 5/8 plywood at the makerspace. So if you're looking for materials, you know, and tell you what, let's do that. Let's make this a 5/8 inch plywood. Alright, so, actually, you know what? I don't know what to expect for a K factor when we do that, so I'm going to make mine a 1/2 inch. And the thickness of this material is going to be a 1/2 inch. Now, this is a little bit of a mystery to me, and this is something that's kind of a work in progress. So I made this one last week, and so I've got my kerf cuts in there, and I know for a fact that I made the beginnings and ends of my kerf cuts at 7 and 10 inches for a length and a width, but I'm not having good luck finding a K factor that fits. So by next week, hopefully I'll have this worked out. But for now, for a 1/2 inch plywood, we're going to type in a K factor of 0.1 or 1.875. Actually, there are bend conditions. This is getting interesting. Relief width, corner conditions. There's a lot of interesting things happening here. All right, so 1.875. Oh, it won't let me do it. Why won't it let me do it? Do I have to type inches? Well, that's interesting. It lets me do 0.5. It lets me do 1. Why won't it let me do 1 point? Well, it won't let me do over 1. I guess we're going to roll with that. And I'm going to go ahead and say save. Alright, so now over here in our drawing, so we've got these sheet metal rules. I made a new one. I'm going to go ahead and say close. And now we can change our sheet metal rule from steel inches. If I click this change rule icon that pops up when I hover over this sheet metal rule here, now I can find where I see I have this 1/2 inch plywood option that I just made, and I say OK. Now it'll make this one just fine. However, you can see I've got a little error in my timeline. And again, this is that same thing that we had the first time. So if you've got an inside corner or a corner like this here, and it won't let you make it because the thickness of our material is greater than that distance. So if you want to make that work, we got to go in here and change this to 0.5, like 1. And now it's going to go ahead and make that for me. So, all right, cool. So now we've got kind of the beginning of our cool little radio here. The next step here is I'd like to. Well, tell you what. Let's make an unfolded flat pattern. So if I come up here to my create menu. And now I choose create flat pattern because I'm in the sheet metal option or space here. I need to select a stationary face. So I'm going to rotate and look at the bottom of my sheet metal or my radio form here. And I'm going to specify one of these sides here. So it just needs to be a flat area. Go ahead, did you have a question? No? Okay, cool. So it just has to be a flat area. Any of these flat sides would be a fine option to choose to unfold your sheet metal. But I'm going to click on that stationary face right there, and then I'm going to say OK. So this gives us our unfolded piece here, and you can see that we've got a length that we know to make our board now. So we've got this 26-inch long board that we'll be making our piece out of. If you want to make this radio out of in that exact same dimension as I did, it's even got some center lines for our cuts, which would be real convenient. Now, the thing that I'd like to figure out, and the thing that I didn't quite have time before class to do, is to add in the kerfs and see if it would still unfold. So let's see if we can do that. When you kerf cut a piece of plywood, the idea of a kerf cut, so a kerf is a blade thickness. So the amount of material that a blade cuts away is usually known as a kerf. And the idea behind kerf bending is you cut a depth that's not all the way through your piece of wood here. So in our case is these inside corners. Actually, I can hold it up to the camera here and you guys can look in class. I can pass this around. So it's got little blades that have been cut through it, channels that have been cut through it, kerfs that have been cut through it, and then it's bent, and that makes it pliable there. So here, I'll hand this to you guys. You can pass around class here. So I'd like to try to model those in my design here, and I think my method for doing that is going to be to create a sketch. So I'm going to hide my radio shape sketch because I don't want to accidentally click on that. And I'm going to go ahead and from my create menu grab my create sketch option. Now we've kind of got already stop points for our curve here, so I want to try to utilize that for sure. So we've got these lines here that are kind of represent the edges of our curve. So if I go ahead and say, why am I not create a sketch? Create sketch. I'm going to specify this surface as my drawing plane. So any surface that's kind of the front of your radio here. And now on this sketch, I'm going to project a couple of things. So I'm going to project both of these curved sections here. Actually, I'm just going to start by projecting the outside line. So I'll go ahead and grab from my create menu. Is it in the create menu? Modify? It's in the create menu. And we choose project. Now, I think I always tell people, like, select what you want to do before you select what you want to do it to. So I'll grab my project include, project, and now this outside line, I'm going to project that. And I'm going to do the same down at the bottom. So this bottom line, or this outside edge of this bottom line, I'll go ahead and project that. And then I'll say OK. Alright, so the reason I projected this line is so I could create the depth of the wood that we're going to leave here. So I can use my offset tool now. So in the modify menu, I can come down to this offset option and I can specify that line as that projected line that I just made there. And now I'm going to offset this 1/8 of an inch. For me, this is a -1/8 of an inch. For you, it might be positive, but the idea is that it goes inwards 1/8 of an inch in towards the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and click enter. Now I'm going to draw Am I going to do that? Can I find the middle of this line pretty easily? Oh, look at that. So I'm going to draw a line from the center of this little point here represents the center of this radiused line that I just made. So it's actually the center of the projected line as well, because they're concentric on each other. But if I draw a line from that center point, and I try to get the very center of my curve here, and you can tell I'm getting the center of the curve. If I zoom in, it might be easier to see. I am getting a little blue triangle that's popping up. So if I hover near the midpoint of that line, it gives me that little blue triangle midpoint snapping option. I suppose here, if I do it wrong, so I did not snap it to the midpoint, I can add that constraint after the fact. So from my constraints menu, I can totally add a midpoint constraint. Yeah, so here it is, midpoint, and I can say that point is on the midpoint of this line, and there we go, and it snaps right into position there. Alright, I'm going to stay zoomed in here, because now what I want to do is I want to draw another line, and that line is going to go right from the end of this line here, and it's going to just connect to our outer edge. So it can be anywhere on this line, because we're going to add a dimension after the fact. So what I really want is this line at this point to be exactly a 6/32 of an inch away from this other line. But I'm going to go ahead and specify that after the fact as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to add one more dimension. So in that create menu, we choose this sketch dimension option. We've done that a couple of times now. I'm going to click on the end point of this line and the end point of this line. And now if I move it kind of inwards here, you can see I'm getting that dimension. And the dimension that I want that to be is 0.0625. It is 1/2 of an eighth of an inch. Because a blade thickness is 1/8 of an inch. So if we're 1/2 of that, because we're only drawing 1/2 of it right now. And now to finish out this single cut here, we're going to use that mirror option again. So I'll use the create menu, and I'll come down to mirror. I'm just going to pick that angled line that we made as my object that I want to mirror. And then as the mirror line, it's going to be that long line that connected to the center of this arc here. And that's going to be our cutout there. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I'm also going to go ahead and say finish sketch. So I've got a single kerf here, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that out from my shape. And the way that I'm going to cut that out is just by using an extrude command. So if I choose this extrude option, and I pick on both halves of that shape, I'm going to go backwards. Something that is useful here, so I always try to make things, or think about how to make things so they're parametric, right? I could indeed specify a dimension here, and go back. How big was my piece? It was 3 inches or so. I feel like it was negative. It was 3 inches. Yeah, I made mine 3 inches, and I could say OK here. Now that totally works, right? But at some future date, I might decide, hey, when I made this flange here, I don't want that flange to be 3 inches anymore. I now want that to be 4 inches. So I went ahead and changed that, and now if I look at the back, oh look, my cutout doesn't come all the way out the back, right? And that is because this extrude will always be 3 inches long. And the way that we avoid that is by changing our extent type. So usually we use an extent type of distance. If we choose to do this extent type of all, so no matter how big or small this I make that flange, our cut will always go all the way through it. So if I say OK here, and now I can right click on that and say edit feature. If I can make this 10 inches if I wanted to. That would be ridiculous, but you could, and the flange would still go all the way through. Alright, now I'm going to fix that. I'm going to say edit feature, and I'm going to go back to my 3 inches, because that's a totally sane number to make a radio. Alright, now the last thing that we're probably going to cover in this class is repeating that kerf. So right now, when we actually make this, we're going to have a whole bunch of these kerfs cut in this curve here. And we can use, let's go ahead and name that, kerf. I believe kerf is spelled with a K, is that right? Let's go with sure. So I want to make a pattern of this thing that I just made. And there is an option in the create menu to make a pattern along a path. And that is indeed exactly what we want to do here. So I'm going to choose this pattern on path option. I'm going to make a pattern not of a face or a body, but of a feature. So a feature is one of the things down here in this timeline. So a feature could be an extrude, a feature could be a flange. I'm not sure why you'd want to make a pattern of a flange, but the feature that I'm going to choose is this extrude feature here. And the path that I'm going to make that pattern on, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my kerf sketch one more time, because I'm going to choose that line as my path. And now I can draw out, oh, see, you can see it's definitely doing it the wrong way, but I'm going to go ahead and see this through here. So when you draw your arrow along the path that you're going to make, if you end up with something like this here, you just need to make an adjustment to your orientation. So right now it's keeping the angle the exact same along the whole path, and I'm actually going to change this orientation from identical to path direction, and then you can see it's making a lot more sense here. So let me look at it straight from the side so it makes even more sense there. Now I want to make this pattern in both directions, and I believe that I can change this from one direction to symmetric. That's working out okay. That's a little weird, but it's not quite symmetric. What about this? Can I change that? Nope, that's my number. So we're definitely going to want to make 7 of these cuts. What if I make it optimized? Yeah, it's weird that it's really not doing it symmetrically. Tell you what, I'm not going to do this symmetrically. I'm going to do it in one direction, and then I'm going to come back and do it again. So there's going to be 4 cuts that go off in this direction here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that back just a little bit, because that's going to stop more like that. And I'll say OK. Oh, that didn't work at all. More info. Compute failed. The face selection is too complex to pattern. Try adding or removing from the selection. Too complex, huh? let's try that one more time. Create pattern, pattern on path. It worked in my test drawing. I'm going to make a pattern of this feature here. I'm going to choose this as my path this time. So maybe the problem was that my path wasn't the right path to choose. Whenever I have one of those compute failed things, it's like, all right, what other lines can I pick on that are the same path? And try to roll with that. So let's see if it'll let me do it that way. There we go. Let me cut it that way. I'm going to do the same thing in this other direction here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create, Pattern, Pattern on Path. I'm going to choose that same extrude feature that I did that first time there. And as the path, I'm going to pick this other side. And again, it's going to be the path direction, so that kind of orients it along tangent to the path, I guess you could say, or normal to the path maybe is the right way of saying that. And I'm going to make 4 of those cuts. And I'm going to say OK. So this is very similar to how my piece actually looks. And this is the part that I didn't have time to test. So now if I go back to my flat pattern, oh, nah, it didn't unfold it. Didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. And that's going to be something that I have to work on for next class. But at any rate, when we actually make our piece, it is going to look like this. It's going to have all these little cuts in it. And you fill those with glue, and then you bend it together and clamp it, and then it stays in that shape. But that is all the time we're going to have in this class. I'm going to do some experimenting in my own time and see if I can figure out how to make it unfold with those cuts. And if I can do that, then I'll come back to you next class with how to make it unfold still. Something I'll mention is, like, modeling these kerfs is unnecessary because you know you're going to have to make them. So modeling them made is kind of like a meh. But it's fun, and it lets us do new things, so that's why we did it. So I'm going to catch up with you guys next week when we continue drawing our radio. I think next week, hopefully, we'll draw the front of our radio. Or maybe next week we should put our speakers in. We should model a speaker. And then we can have a location for our speaker planned out when we draw the front, because front will have to have speaker openings, and planning for where we're going to put our knobs and all that kind of stuff. So next week we'll draw a speaker for the inside of our radio. Do you guys have any questions at home before we wrap up? All right, beautiful. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good week, everyone. Cool. We'll see you later, Nick.